in Rajasthan today. Both the pilot and the co-pilot are dead. A court of inquiry has been established to find out what led to this crash. This is not the first or second. This is the third time there's been a crash involving the Jaguar Trainer in just the calendar year of 2025. Earlier, there was a crash in Ambala in Haryana, and then there was one in Jamnagar in Gujarat. Now, this is a type of aircraft that's been in the IAF fleet for the last 45 plus years. Numerous committees, even the Comptroller and Auditor General, had back in 2017-18 flagged off safety concerns around the Jaguars and in fact had recommended that they be phased out from the fleet. In fact, the recommendation to the Government of India is that they be retired from the fleet by 2028 to 2030. But one too many lives have been lost in that interim. It has fallen on deaf ears. The government, the forces have been trying to retire these fleet, but it is simply not happening on the ground. One by one, more and more pilots are dying. In the last 45 years that the Jags have been in service, there have been 50 accidents involving the Jaguar. So much so that both the French and the British, in fact, it was the agencies there that developed the Jaguar back in the 1960s and 70s, they have retired the Jaguar, but India has not. It's time to ask that uncomfortable but very pertinent question: is it time to retire the Jaguars?
ये हादसा हुआ तब मेरी सिस्टर यहाँ पास गांव में, तो विमान एकदम नीचे था और विमान लड़खड़ा था, तो बहन ने सोचा कि ये विमान यहीं पे उतरने वाला है और जस्ट 2 मिनट के बाद में यहाँ पे वो जोरदार धमाका हुआ और विमान क्रैश हो गया।
सर, वो समझ लो मेरा खेत है, मेरे घर के अंदर बैठा था, मेरे पास में मेरे भैया आए हुए थे, उनको मैं साथ में कैंपर गाड़ी से यहाँ पहुँचा। 5 धुआं का गुब्बारा था, बिल्कुल काला। जो भी मतलब पायलट साहब जो ऑन एक्सपायर हो गए, उनकी जो बॉडी के पार्ट्स मिले अलग अलग मिले हैं और एक एयरफोर्स की डायरी भी मिली। पायलट ने गांव को बचाने के लिए अपना अथक प्रयास किया था, ये कन्फर्म है।
Well, the Jaguar was originally developed in a joint venture between France's Breguet and the UK's British Aircraft Corporation. They were acquired by India back in 1979. Though countries like France, the UK, Oman, Nigeria, they've all long retired their fleet of Jaguars, India continues to fly over 100 of them. In fact, despite these accidents, like I said, there have been 50 instances of accidents in the last 45 years. The Jaguar remains a critical asset for the Indian Air Force. The plans are there to try and phase out the oldest aircraft between 2028 and 2031. They want to replace them with modern alternatives like the Tejas Mark 1. But the Tejas Mark 1A is still in its stage of development. There are, of course, issues around the engine and technology transfer, so it hasn't quite hit the fleet yet. Attempts to re-engine the Jaguar with Honeywell F125 in-turbofan engines was scrapped in 2019 because of the cost concerns. The CAG had also flagged that off, saying you're better off buying newer aircraft, newer trainers, as opposed to trying to upgrade the older fleet. The IAF has since resorted to acquiring surplus parts and even airframes from other countries to keep the fleet of Jaguars operational. Yet, serviceability on the Jaguars is quite poor, which means that only about 50 to 60% of the fleet of about 100 aircraft is at any given point of time ready to be airborne, is often mission ready. Only half of the fleet is mission ready at any given point of time. Since their induction, the Jaguars have been involved in 50 accidents in the last 45 years. So these recurring crashes, they have prompted detailed investigations, though public disclosure of some of these findings have been limited in the past. It leaves the precise cause of these crashes open to speculation, despite the fact that there have been multiple courts of inquiry. Now, back in April of this year, there was a Jaguar Trainer jet of the IAF that crashed during a night training mission that led to the death of one pilot and injuries to the other. Just taking off from the Jamnagar airfield, the 2-seater aircraft experienced a technical malfunction. A month before that, there was one Jaguar aircraft that crashed just moments after taking off from the Ambala airbase in Haryana. The pilot managed to eject the aircraft safely. A statement issued by the IAF said that the crash took place during a routine training sortie after encountering a system malfunction. In January of 2019, a Jaguar which had taken off from the Gorakhpur Air Force Station crashed shortly after departure because of a suspected technical snag. In that case, the pilot managed to eject safely and the plane came down over a field, avoiding residential areas. A court of inquiry was also established to investigate, with initial reports suggesting that the pilot's quick decision-making minimized the potential harm. In 2018, there was a tragic incident that involved the Jaguar. Air Commodore Sanjay Chauhan, a highly experienced test pilot and air officer commanding of the Jamnagar Air Force Station, was killed. The Jaguar went down because of a routine training mission, and despite Chauhan's extensive experience of over 2,000 hours of flying on the Jaguar alone, that crash proved to be fatal. A court of inquiry was ordered again, though the specific findings into the death of Mr. Chauhan were not widely publicized. And that leads us to ask the very basic question. Many IAF families themselves have asked for the retirement of these old fleets. Over 100 of these aircraft are currently in service. Is it time to retire the Jags? All right, I want to go across to an expert view on this. Air Marshal retired Sanjeev Kapoor is former DG of Inspection and Safety at the Indian Air Force. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us. You know, it's a real sad story, but unfortunately a very repetitive story with the Jaguars particularly. There have been numerous accidents just in this year alone in 2025. This is the third such accident that has happened. You had one in Jamnagar in Gujarat some months ago, then you had one in Haryana, and now the latest one in Rajasthan. For a number of years now, a lot of committees have recommended, and you know, it's also common sense really, that the Jaguars need to be retired. It's been in service for the last 40 plus years, 45 years. Why are these trainers not getting retired? Why is this fleet not getting retired?
I think that point of view, to link it with the life of the platform is not okay in my opinion. The U.S. Air Force, the French Air Force, the Royal Air Force are flying fighters which are 5 decades. So as to say that Indian Air Force is the only organization which are flying aeroplanes of this vintage and age is incorrect. Now, here lies the whole thing that each and every time the aeroplane of Indian Air Force is taken up for flying, it is certified and checked by all people, and it is signed and the pilots countersign it, and then he goes to the it means this aircraft is fully serviceable in all aspects of flying. That's it. Now, coming to specifically Jaguars, the Jaguars have been in our fleet for over 4 decades now, and they have constantly gone through upgrade. Now, the Darin 1, Darin 2, this was Darin 3, and these upgrades have been done by HAL and the OEM. Yes, it is true that most of the air forces have done away with Jaguars. But in our case, we have squadron strength which is so less and depleting that we should have got our LCS by now to fill up this void, which didn't happen. The present squadron strength is about 31. The established as 42 requirement for 2 fronts is much higher than that.
Yeah.
So this gap has to be maintained, and these aircrafts are constantly upgraded till we reach a level, and the period which I gather or recall is 2028 to 2031 or 2032 is the period in which
they'll retire them.
Now the Jaguars would be phased out. Now, specifically coming to today's accident, it was a trainer aircraft on a training mission, and the Jaguars too, they're the only aircraft that we have for deep flying, does low level flying. So what I gather is that this aircraft was on a training mission, pro flying. Now, this thing to premise that this aircraft is old and not serviceable is incorrect. It's out of the way. Now, something has happened in the air which the pilots could not reject. That is my biggest worry. Because at low level, the reaction time is very, and Jaguars actually fly very low. Because to detect radars and surprise and other things, this is the platform which does this practice. And they were practicing over flat areas. And we pick up these areas of not hills, but deserts or Rajasthan sector to do this kind of low flight. Now, it could be a bird hit, it could be a technical failure, or worse is combat flight and into terrain, in which the pilots mushed into the ground. Any of these things could have happened in my view.
But sir, I just wanted to look at the sort of record itself. The point I was making was not it should be retired because it's old, but it should be retired because its safety record is a little patchy. I mean, in the last 45 years, I believe there have been 50 accidents involving the Jaguar. This is the statistic that we have. And this year, like I said, there was one in Ambala, there was one in Jamnagar, and this is the third accident that is happening involving a Jaguar. There was multiple CAG reports. I think the last one, the big one that happened was in 2017 or 18, which said clearly that it's time to retire this. Now, what I'm curious to know is, at a time when India's defense budget if you look at the last 10-year period, has gone up by more than 3 times from about, 2.3 trillion or so. It's now 6.8 trillion rupees, that is, 6,80,000 crores. The point is, why aren't we spending on trainer aircraft? I mean, there was a brief bit, I think, about, at the turn of the century or maybe a little after that, where they decided to get a few Hawks. But, sufficiently inadequate to try and train the large number of, pilots who get into our force. So the point is, why is there not adequate focus on this? You heard the chief also, I mean, in a different context, lose his cool the other day I think it was last year at the Aero Show about, the LCA project and the deadlines being moved for the engines and so on and so forth. If that's the priority for your frontline fighters, then trainer would not be as much priority, right?
See, Dhaka, as the world is progressing ahead and ahead, very few aircrafts are now being utilized for actual training. Most of the training is done on simulators. So simulators are the in thing. No Airbus 320 or a Boeing pilot flies the aeroplane. Bulk of it is about 98% is done on simulators. And he just does one or couple of sorties. In Air Force also we have, but as I told you, this fleet is old. This is about 40 years plus. We have Jaguar simulators, but they are not as advanced as the modern simulators, say of a C-30 or of a Rafale or other fleet, or C-17, C-130. The simulators are, exceptional. Means when you sit in the simulators, there is action. So slowly, globally, the training is shifting onto simulators. And we have Hawks, we have other aeroplanes. So training is not an issue. The gap between the earlier periods when Hawks had not arrived and the pilots were gradually shifting from, say, Kiran's on to MiG-21 was the period when the services did. That is no more an issue. The gap to switch to a modern platform is no more an issue now, in my opinion. The issue which is to fly these aeroplanes in these conditions. India is an extreme country. When you fly in hills, it is minus 30, minus 40. When you fly in, say, east, it's thick jungles, humid. When you fly in Rajasthan sector, say you operate from Jaisalmer in summers, the surface temperature is 45, but the tarmac temperature is process 50, 55 degrees. The same machine, the same pilot, when you fly over sea, it is the same. So same machine, same pilot has to be trained for all kinds of warfare and all kinds of terrain. And that training actually in vintage aircraft has to be done on the platform itself. Because the roll clearances and the currencies have to be made that way. So that is the aspect we can discuss. But not specifically to say that the training is the weak.
All right. Air Marshal, thank you very much for joining us and putting that issue into perspective for us. Like I said, our concern is also just about the losing of the pilots. I mean, I think that is the bottom line. We shouldn't have to lose pilots in this day and age.
So painful it is, yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor, for joining us. While talking about flying objects, weeks after the crash involving Air India 171 Ahmedabad to London that killed 260 people on board, sources have told CNN News 18 that the preliminary report on the findings is expected to be submitted by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board under the Ministry of Civil Aviation. The investigation has zeroed in, we're told, as per the Air Currents magazine, which is a renowned international aviation magazine, that there is concern around the engine fuel control switches, and the report may reveal either some systemic or technical lapses that led to one of the worst aviation tragedies anywhere in the world, leave alone India, in which 241 people on board died, and there were 24 others who died on the ground. Speculation is also brewing over what exactly went wrong. A renowned aviation industry publication called Air Current is now reporting that there may have been a possibility of improper movement of the fuel control switches in the cockpit. Now, what are these fuel control switches? How do they work? And what could have possibly been the problem around that? Now, fuel is drawn from the fuel tanks. There are at least 3 fuel tanks in the 787. There's one on the left, one on the right, and one in the middle. There are pressurized pumps that allow the flow of the fuel from the tanks into the jet engine through fuel lines. It passes through filters which remove the impurities. The fuel control unit then regulates the flow of fuel into the engine. Fuel and air are then mixed in the carburetor just before the cylinder delivery. It's almost like like the engine of a car, but of course much more sophisticated. The fuel to air mixture is then ignited. That produces the power to drive the aircraft. It produces the power required by the engine to move the aircraft, both give it lift as well as thrust. Now, what about these fuel control switches? Now, there are two modes in which the fuel control switches operate. There is a run mode where the fuel is then allowed to move from the tanks to the engine. And then there is a cut-off mode where the fuel is blocked. Now, this would cause the fuel supply to stop flowing to the engines. There are two switches because it's a double-engine aircraft. This may result in the immediate shutdown and the loss of any lift or thrust if there is a cut-off of fuel flow from the tanks through the carburetor into either of the two engines. Now, here's how the fuel switches in the in-flight management works. The pilots monitor the fuel levels, the pressure at which the fuel is being moved from the tanks through the carburetor into the engines, as well as the flow of that fuel. Pilots may then need to manage the level of fuel distribution. Usually, these switches are moved only once while on the ground and once after landing. Alerts and warnings are generated for fuel-related issues, which are then acted upon by the pilots. Whether or not those lights, those warning signs went off in the cockpit, we will know once this report is submitted by the accident board, the accident investigation board. But right now, as per Air Current, as per this International Aviation Journal, the focus seems to be on the movement, perhaps faulty, perhaps incorrect movement of the fuel control switches. Let's listen into my colleague Anvit, who has a detailed sort of breakdown of what the investigation is looking into right now.
As we have learned that the preliminary report in the AI 171 crash is shortly to be submitted to the Ministry of Civil Aviation by the AAIB, the Air Accident Investigation Bureau. Shortly, it is expected on 11th or 12th of July because the crash had taken place on 12th of June, and on 13th the committee was formed to probe this incident, and they usually have a 1 month time to finish the preliminary probe, after which the detailed probe will be undertaken, which might take months or weeks. Now, initial report is expected to be submitted on Friday to the Ministry of Civil Aviation and to the other stakeholders to ensure that whatever shortcomings were there, they need to be fulfilled so that future incidents can be prevented. Now, if we talk about the sources informing CNN News 18 on what could possibly be in the preliminary report, it is largely about the engine failure. Like that had been speculated since the beginning that there could be a possible dual engine failure on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft that was involved in this crash that killed more than 260 people, including those on board, and the collateral damage that happened on ground. Now, the aspect that the investigators are looking into, that why there was a dual engine failure, which is speculated to be the primary cause of this accident, because remember the pilot said also the last message from the pilot to the ATC was Mayday followed by no thrust. No thrust would mean that there was no power in the engines, and the plane did not climb altitude as it was expected to, as it was bound for Gatwick from Ahmedabad.
The Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, the International Anti-Terror Financing Watchdog, has included a separate section now on what is called state-sponsored terrorism in its latest report for the very first time. This reinforces the position that India has held at least since 2022, when it identified Pakistan as a state sponsor of terror financing. Pakistan-linked terror groups feature prominently in the FATF Global Risk Assessment Report. The FATF has highlighted that some state actors continue to provide support to terrorist organizations without, of course, naming any country. But the implication is loud and clear. The writing is certainly there in the report, and the implication is certainly towards Pakistan. It also mentions that groups not designated by the United Nations but supported by states often operate freely, and they have regular access to funding globally. Despite Pakistan's removal from the FATF grey list back in 2022, the FATF is now stressing the need for ongoing vigilance. The presence of active and rebranded terror-linked networks, weak enforcement, and large informal economies that keep the terror machine rolling have been cited as reasons as to why there is still no definitive curtailment of the finances and the fund flows that keep these terror organizations alive. Now, here are some of the funding routes that have been highlighted in the FATF report. There is the Hawala route, of course, which is unlicensed remittance systems which are used widely for moving funds across borders. There's the cash-based informal economy in border and rural areas, which remains again a key enabler. The FATF has also flagged the misuse of non-profit organizations and charities in Pakistan to try and raise and root funds. The Jamaat-ud-Dawa charitable fund, once upon a time, for example, was a front for the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Online platforms, including social media and messaging apps, are also being used by Pakistan-based terror groups. They're crowdfunding their terror money. They're also looking at foreign donations for this kind of terror financing. There's also now, in this day and age, virtual assets like cryptocurrencies and bitcoins, which are also being increasingly adopted for covert terror financing by Pakistan-linked outfits.
In what is going to be seen as a huge step up and in long-standing India's demand that the FATF must grey-list Pakistan, a new updated report of the FATF seems to be ticking all the right boxes. First of all, what sources are telling us of the report which has been accessed, that the Finance Ministry's Department of Revenue has sent this report at least 3 times over and also written a letter to FATF that there are sufficient grounds on which Pakistan should be put into a grey list. But what is interesting is in this updated FATF report, for the first time ever, it makes a reference to state-sponsored terrorism, which is of course without naming Pakistan. The indication is that Pakistan as a state is itself stoking terror from its soil. It's targeting India, and almost every bit of its machinery is being used for this purpose. What is also very interesting is in this updated report, it talks about how the dark world of web is also being misused. For example, cryptocurrencies. For example, even e-commerce. The powder, for example, which was used to carry out the Pahalgam attack, that was sourced through an e-commerce website. Apart from this, of course, online gaming apps, all of them are being extensively used by those countries, and in this case Pakistan, for stoking or funding their terror activities. Remember, it was in 2022 where Pakistan was taken off the grey list, and the reason of course is that it is usually believed that money laundering is the main purpose and that has got no connection with terrorism. However, with this kind of a report, India will be able to prove and has sent that proof to FATF that there is a reason enough why Pakistan should be put into a grey list.
And some domestic news now ahead of elections in Bihar. The Special Intensive Review, or SIR, of electoral rolls that has triggered a massive political furor. Today, the Congress and other allied parties of the India Gathbandhan, they hit the streets in Patna in protest, calling for a chakka jam over what they claimed was a flawed exercise this close to the elections in Bihar. Raising doubts over the electoral process and the Election Commission itself, Rahul Gandhi once again repeated his allegations against the electoral rolls manipulation, which he said first happened in Maharashtra, and now he's claiming the same thing is happening in Bihar. An election that the Congress lost in Maharashtra, much against expectations. He continues to hunker down on that theme, on that political attack, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has dismissed looking at those allegations. But I want to first play out a series of political reactions to what happened today in Patna. It was a show of strength. It was also a show of protest against the Election Commission. But the Election Commission is doubling down, saying that it will continue with the exercise of the scientific revision of electoral rules.
कि इलेक्शन कमिश्नर बीजेपी और आरएसएस जैसे बात कर रहे हैं। ये सिर्फ आपसे वोट चोरी नहीं हो रहा है, ये आपका भविष्य चोरी हो रहा है। आपसे आपका जुर्म, आपका हक जो बनता है, जो रोजगार है, आपका धन है, ये सब आपसे चोरी किया जाएगा। ये लोकतंत्र को खत्म करना चाहते हैं, ये हम बिहार के लोग हरगिज़ नहीं होने देंगे, नहीं होने देंगे।
Now, despite an effort to create fear and even confusion on the ground, the Election Commission is sticking to its guns. In a latest response, Election Commission sources have informed that there is no confusion on the field and that the process is taking place as per the scientific review or revision of rolls as has been ordered by the Election Commission. The process will continue and that there is no change in the instructions given to various district election officers. Furthermore, the Election Commission sources also say that it's unclear why some political parties are trying to create confusion over this process. Meanwhile, the BJP has countered what Rahul Gandhi and Tejaswi Yadav today alleged from Patna, that this was a massive scientific rigging of the electoral rolls. In fact, the BJP says that this is simply for the opposition, particularly the political dynasts that Mr. Rahul Gandhi and Mr. Tejashwi Yadav are, to try and protect their political dynasties and their political families from the upcoming losses in the Bihar elections, which are slated in the next few months.
तेजस्वी यादव या राहुल गांधी, लालू प्रसाद यादव के बातों को जनता नहीं मानती है। 4 करोड़ लोगों ने फॉर्म जमा कर दिया। एकदम ये लोग तुष्टीकरण वाले लोग हैं। ये लोग बांग्लादेशी को चाहते हैं कि मतदाता बना रहे, कि आप लोग बूथ पर क्यों नहीं जाते हैं। सिर्फ पटना में या रोडों पर हंगामा करने के लिए विपक्ष होता है क्या? बूथ पर जाइए, बूथ पर बताइए कि ये बिहार में है, बिहार में जन्मे हैं, बिहारी हैं, गारंटी देता हूं कि एक भी नाम नहीं कटेगा।
All right, July 9th is the deadline for the United States and its reciprocal tariffs, the Trump tariffs, to kick in. India is hoping to sign a mini trade deal with the United States to try and escape these tariffs. But President Donald Trump's tirade on these tariffs continues. He slammed BRICS countries once again. This is the second time he's done that in this past week. In addition to threatening 10% tariffs on BRICS and those aligned with the BRICS countries, he's also announced an additional 50% tariff on copper. Remember, India does export a fair degree of copper around the world to the United States, about 350 million or so in the last financial year. It's a major export item from India to the US. So 50% tariff on copper is a matter of concern. Another cause of concern, and perhaps a bigger one, is the tariffs that Trump has announced on pharmaceutical products, particularly generic drugs, a lot of which go into the United States. It's a $10 billion export industry to the US. Trump has threatened that pharmaceutical imports into the US could face a tariff of up to 200%.
And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals and other things into the country. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%. We'll give them a certain period of time to get their act together. Ones we did seal, as you know, they're 50%. We did aluminum, 50%. Lumber just came out.
Why don't you announce copper?
And we did cars. And now today we're doing copper.
Now, here's how India could be facing the brunt if President Trump were to act on these threats, whether it's copper or pharmaceuticals, or of course steel and aluminum already tariffed at 25%. Copper is used in tech, in construction, other key industries. India's exports of copper were around $2 billion or so in 24-25. Of which the United States accounted for about $360 million. That's roughly about 20% or so, just under 20%. So a fifth of the copper that India exports goes to the United States. That is critical. But even more critical is pharma or generic medicines. It's a major sector of export for India, pharmaceuticals. Manufacturing hubs are there in Telangana, in Himachal Pradesh, in Maharashtra. The US, in fact, is the largest export market for generic medicines and drugs. Somewhere to the tune of almost $10 billion. That's what India clocked in 24-25, just to the US market alone. That was 20% more than the previous fiscal. The United States accounts for, in fact, 40% of all of India's total pharma export goes to this one market called the United States. So that pharma being tariffed at 200% would really be a killer for a large number of these players, particularly the small and medium players in the pharmaceutical space. He's also accused Trump of the BRICS group of countries, saying that they want to hurt the United States. They want to degenerate the dollar. This has been a pet peeve with Donald Trump. He says that these countries will now have to face an additional 10% tariffs if they don't get their act together. Let's listen in to my colleague Sanjay Suri, who's been tracking this tariff story for a while now. Let's listen in to what he has to say in terms of his take and perspective on what India can expect from these Trump trade deals, whether or not one will come through or not.
Just when India was waiting for the announcement of a sweet trade deal with the US, while the rest of the world got nasty letters from the White House one after another, more reasons have emerged from Trump for worry for India rather than celebration, and that should surprise no one. President Trump not only stayed silent on any deal with India at the cabinet meeting with media present, he announced a new 50% tariff on import of copper. Last year, India exported about $330 million worth of copper to the US, and that was an increase from the year before. So that now faces this 50% tariff to add to the 50% tariff on steel and aluminum that are already hurting Indian industry and exporters quite seriously and quite significantly. India is a relatively minor exporter of copper, and this tariff will seriously hurt major exporters such as Chile with $40 billion annual export of copper, Germany with $29 billion of exports, and other major exporters of copper such as Japan, China, South Korea. But relatively small as the Indian exports are, they will no doubt hurt exporters and export, and these would certainly not very likely have been protected by any trade deal, just as a deal is not expected to protect export of Indian steel worth $500 million last year and aluminium exports that approached $1 billion. These stand and are charged separately.
All right, I also want to go across to Mr. Mark Linscott. He's a senior advisor with the U.S. India Strategic Partnership Forum. Thank you very much, Mr. Linscott. So obviously, there's a lot of anticipation here in India, some degree of concern as well, whether or not India will get some form of a limited trade deal or a mini trade deal with the United States. Will this deadline pass? Will they extend the deadline? So far, India is not part of those first 14 countries on whom Trump has slapped these tariffs. What is your analysis of where things stand as of now? Because, trade can't be seen in isolation. India and the U.S. are strategic partners. Does Trump view it that way, or does he see trade independent of the rest of the aspects of the relationship?
Yeah, I certainly think he views the strategic relationship between the United States and India as important, as a critical one. I think factors in the trade considerations, but it is on a separate track. I mean, trade is, in many respects, his number one priority across policy and negotiations. It is a strategic issue for him. So the decision is his. I mean, we're all in the dark about what will happen and when it will happen, specifically with respect to India. I've been constantly renewing my feeds to see if there's some news, some update. I certainly anticipated an announcement before now.
He did say last night, though, there are going to be 7 countries with whom deals are going to be announced. And as we await that, there is anticipation, like I said, that India is one of those countries with whom a deal is announced. The rest of the countries, he said he will continue writing these letters to. He wrote to 14 countries on Monday, and then he's expecting to send more letters over the next day or two. If a deal were to happen between the U.S. and India, do you reckon some of the more contentious issues like agricultural produce and stuff around legal immigration, high-skilled workers, all of this will be kept out of whatever agreement may be arrived at?
Well, first of all, on his postings last night, I saw those as well. The terminology was very hard to understand. It referenced releasing 7 countries. And I have no idea what that means. Was it to announce deals? Is it to issue new letters? It wasn't not entirely clear. And I had some discussions with other experts, and we were all scratching our heads on what that post he made last night on, I think it was on True Social. In terms of what it could include, assuming an announcement, I certainly hope there will be an announcement of a deal. It's interim. It's partial. It's a first phase agreement. And as a consequence, it will not be the comprehensive trade relationship. It won't cover all sectors. But I think it will cover a sampling of almost every sector. It's probably going to be heavy on industrial, both with respect to tariffs and tariff cuts and commitments on both sides on tariffs. It's likely to include a number of priority non-tariff barriers for industrial, but I do think there will be some results on agriculture as well. Not the most sensitive issues. For example, I don't think dairy will be addressed. I don't think wheat or rice will be addressed, but I think that there will be some results on tree nuts, on fruit, perhaps most importantly, because it would be a big step forward on some grains products. And they've been working hard on these issues. They are, in some respects, no-brainers, low-hanging fruit. And I do think a deal, assuming it's announced, will include items like that in the agricultural sector.
All right, Mr. Linscott, we'll await that announcement from the White House. For the moment, thank you very much for joining us and putting that into perspective for our viewers. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. U.S. President Donald Trump, he shrugged off his one-time first buddy, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, and his plans for floating a new political party. He's calling it the America Party. Trump has called this a ridiculous idea. He has said that Musk is off the rails. But can Musk be brushed aside? He is, after all, the richest man in the world. He sunk in something like $250 million into Trump's campaign in 2024. He could likely do that again. Musk is the world's richest person. He's teased this idea of a new party. He's called this the America Party, and he's been talking about it for weeks now. I guess the final straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, was really the passage of this one big, beautiful bill, which, of course, will add trillions into the federal deficit. And Musk doesn't like that idea. He says it's anathema to DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, that he was running. So at the end of the day, all his work over the last 3-4 months, he says, has been rendered useless. He, in fact, ran an informal poll on social media on X, the platform that he owns, and he claims that there was 80% support for a new party, a third party, among 5.5+ million respondents who took part in that poll. But then, Twitter is not real-life politics. You have to get down to the brass tacks, you have to have candidates, you have to have winnability, you have to have broad-based appeal. The problem is America has almost never had an appetite for third-party candidates. Some of them have got about 10% vote. One, in fact, got 20% of the vote back in 1992, Ross Perot. But Musk may be slightly different. He's got limitless resources. He is a billionaire. He can sink in millions if he finds the right candidate to back. And as he claims, there might be a degree of disillusionment in the MAGA universe, which is the base that Trump has built. But is that enough to make a splash in a political system, in a political landscape in America for over the last 200 years? That whole system has been dominated by two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. There have only been Democrat presidents or Republican presidents in the last 200 years. And as a reason for that, because the political system in America is built in such a fashion. It's a winner-takes-all political system. Here's a deep dive. In a dramatic move that threatens to upend American politics just about a year before the 2026 midterm elections, Elon Musk has announced the formation of a new political party, the American Party. Positioned as a centrist alternative to the corrupt duopoly of the Democrats and the Republicans, Musk has made this dramatic announcement, which marks the clearest political break between him and Donald Trump. President Trump responded by assailing Elon Musk right after he made the announcement. He described Musk as being off the rails. This after Musk said during the July 4th weekend that he was creating a new political party that would challenge both the Republicans and the Democrats.
I think it's ridiculous to start a third party. We have a tremendous success with the Republican Party. The Democrats have lost their way, but it's always been a two-party system. And I think starting a third party just adds to confusion. It really seems to have been developed for two parties. Third parties have never worked. So he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
Musk's effort to create a new political party called the America Party is the latest rupture in his relationship with Trump. Musk, who's the world's wealthiest man, spent hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact $250 million of his America Super PAC to support Trump's presidential campaign in 2024. And then Trump rewarded Musk with a wide-ranging position known as the head of DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, which oversaw drastic cuts to government budgets and government departments. In fact, their close bond between Trump and Musk crumbled in a public spectacle last month. Trump pushed through his sprawling Big Beautiful Bill through the U.S. Congress. Musk did not like that piece of legislation. He panned it publicly. That legislation is projected to add trillions to the federal debt. In fact, Musk at one point called it a disgusting abomination. He even called Republicans as the Porky Pig Party, none of which went down well with Trump. In fact, Musk also threatened on Twitter, the platform that he now owns, that he would support primary challengers against any Republican, congressman, or senator who voted for this legislation. In fact, that legislation passed with almost unanimous Republican support both in the House as well as in the Senate. So basically, Musk was threatening Trump's candidates, Trump's senators and congressmen who are due to run for midterm elections in 2026, that they will be faced with primary challengers who will be funded by the world's richest man. Trump, in response, has also threatened to cut off billions of dollars in federal contracts and tax subsidies to Elon Musk and his various companies. Trump said over the weekend that Musk had opposed the Big Beautiful Bill because it eliminated the electric vehicle mandate, which would have been a boon for Tesla, which is one of Elon Musk's biggest companies. He also opposed a Musk nominee to head NASA, which is the American space agency.
What happened to Elon Musk?
Nothing, he's upset that he's losing his EV mandate, and he's very upset about things, but he could lose a lot more than that.
Musk, who has grown increasingly vocal on political issues in recent years, particularly around immigration, censorship, artificial intelligence, and what he perceives as the decline of Western civilization, he claims that the America Party will represent a future-focused, pragmatist coalition that transcends tribalism. He made an announcement on his platform X where he declared that the current system incentivizes extremism. He says the Democrats have gone too far left, the Republicans are trapped in the past, and most Americans feel politically homeless. The American Party is for the sane center, for people who want competent leadership, technological progress, and individual liberty. To his millions of followers on social media, many of whom overlap between disillusioned centrists, libertarians, and even disaffected progressives, the message by Musk has landed well. But to seasoned political observers, this endeavor by Musk is destined to follow a long line of failed third-party bids in American political history. Despite periodic attempts to try and shake up the two-party system, no single third-party or independent candidate has ever won the U.S. presidency. Most have not even come close. The most successful modern-day third-party candidate was Ross Perot. He ran an unsuccessful campaign in 1992. He secured almost 20% of the popular vote, which in itself is an extraordinary figure, but he did not win a single electoral college vote. In 1996, Perot ran again. He ran under the Reform Party's banner, but his share of the popular vote dwindled to just about 8%. Before Ross Perot, George Wallace in 1968 ran on a segregationist platform. He won 5 southern states, he had 46 electoral college votes, but that campaign, in effect, ended up helping Richard Nixon by splitting the Democratic base. In 2000, Ralph Nader, he ran as a Green Party candidate. He was blamed by many Democrats for siphoning away votes from Al Gore in Florida, which enabled George W. Bush to win the presidency by a razor-thin margin. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled in Bush's favor. The bottom line is this: third-party candidacies have historically failed in the United States. They have often ended up becoming spoilers, influencing the outcome by taking away votes from major party candidates. Which is why now many MAGA folks, MAGA supporters, are claiming on X and other social media platforms that the only outcome of Musk's third party, the American Party, would actually be to help the Democrats win those Republican seats in 2026 in the midterms, which Trump had carried in 2024. Can Elon Musk, the world's richest man and one of the most polarizing voices, defy history and defy structural odds? Well, the short answer to that question is no. Certainly not in 2026, maybe not even in 2028. Musk may have money, he may have reach, he may have name and face recognition, but turning that into a coherent political movement, that's a different matter altogether. Building a political party requires more than just a Twitter following. It demands organizational support in all 50 states, a nationwide ground game, policy coherence, and a candidate who's got broad-based appeal. And as of now, Musk has not even announced whether he is the one who intends to run, whether he's going to make a run for president in 2028, or whether he's going to back another candidate under the American Party banner. Whichever way this cookie crumbles, it will be hard to dent the populism and the popularity, really, of Donald Trump, who currently is the most powerful figure in modern American politics. All right, so Elon Musk threatening to launch this third party, the America Party as he calls it. He claims, basis Twitter polls that he's run, that more than 80% of Americans want a third party. But historically, have Americans shown a penchant for a third party in what has been essentially a two-party dominated system between the Republicans and the Democrats for, God knows, more than a couple of centuries now? Joining us now is a very special guest, someone who's predicted the last 10 presidential elections correctly. Save the last one, I must say. Alan Lichtman, American historian, political analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Lichtman, and nice to see you again. What do you make of Mr. Musk and his threat? He claims, at least as per the polls that he's run on the social media platform that he owns, X, that 80% of America wants this new party, which he believes neither the Democrats or the Republicans are able to adequately represent. Is there an appetite for Americans for a third party?
Well, of course, his poll on X has no scientific validity whatsoever because it's obviously a very biased sample. But even in the scientific polls, there is always a response. Yes, we'd like an alternative to the two major parties. We consider voting for a third party. But when it comes right down to it, third parties have not had much success in the American political system. There has never, in our more than 200-year history of our republic, been a sustained third party that has elected significant numbers of candidates and significantly participated in the governing of the country. But third parties do have a history of being spoilers, that is, of draining votes from one of the other parties. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt, the former president, ran as a third-party candidate on the Progressive Party. He had been a Republican president. He split the Republican vote and elected Woodrow Wilson. In 1992, Ross Perot ran as an independent candidate, a billionaire, and he got 19% of the vote. Didn't get any electoral college votes, but was instrumental in defeating the incumbent George H.W. Bush. So that's the potential of an Elon Musk third party. It can be a spoiler, and it's most likely, presuming it gets off the ground. You never know with Musk whether it's going to be real or not. It is likely to drain votes from Republicans. Not too many Democrats are going to vote for a Musk-themed party. And given how close elections are in a few congressional districts or states for Senate elections, it could make a difference.
So I'm curious to know, how does Musk then sort of counter this criticism? Because he's saying that, look, MAGA, which is the Make America Great Again base that Trump sort of constructed over the last 3 election cycles that he's run, he says the MAGA base is split on a number of issues. Mr. Musk says MAGA doesn't like this big, beautiful bill. MAGA didn't want America to enter the Israel-Iran war. On a whole bunch of issues, he says, MAGA is split, and he's catering to the faction within MAGA, which Trump and his insiders in the administration seem to be out of touch with. Is there any credence to that at all?
I'd say there's minimal credence to that. There are always complaints and grousing within the base of any party. People are not, always expressing their joy and their content. But again, the only thing we have to go on is the polls. And there's very little sign that there's any major cracks in Trump's base. His approval is still very strong among Republicans and even stronger among Trump voters. But, as I said, to make a difference in elections and to hurt Republicans, he doesn't need to generate a major defection from the Republican base. Just 2, 3, 4, 5 points could be enough to swing critical elections in the House and the Senate to the Democrats in 2026.
So if his game is, and as you said, the best case scenario is that he could help take away 1 or 2 percentage points away from Republican candidates, and he's threatening to put up candidates, primary challengers certainly, in all of those Republican seats, those lawmakers who voted for this big beautiful bill and campaigned for something else earlier. wouldn't he end up helping the Democrats? And how does it, again, I mean, in the Musk universe, that would be a worse thing. Undercutting Trump or undercutting MAGA would be slightly the lesser sin as opposed to helping a Democrat.
Yeah, look, Musk is the mirror image of Trump. What do Musk and Trump care about? Themselves. That is their overwhelming priority. Anyone who's followed them at all, it's not a subtle analysis. So I think this is a revenge on the part of Musk that he's angry about the bill because its provisions, for example, on election vehicles hurt his business and his priorities. Trump is threatening to cancel some of his critical contracts with the government. And he probably does have some genuine concern, again, for his pocketbook over overweening deficits. So I think this is very personal for Musk, and it's not reflective of some kind of broad ideological campaign.
Can you explain to our viewers here in India, using some of these historic examples that you quoted a moment ago about Ross Perot in the 90s? I think he's had the best performance of a third-party candidate in a presidential election, but there have been other instances.
Best, Teddy Roosevelt.
Second best. In the modern era, let's say. There was Ralph Nader in early 2000. I think there was a candidate called, if I'm not mistaken, George Wallace, I think his name was, back in the 60s. Why is the American system so oscillating between the Democrat Party and the Republican Party? Why is it not built for a third party? Why do Americans, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the hustings, why do American voters not want to vote for a third party candidate?
It's an excellent question, and it runs deep into American history. First of all, there is the system by which we elect candidates. It's called the first past the post. In order to, say, win a House seat or a Senate seat, you have to win at least a plurality of the vote, and in a few states, a majority, or you go to a runoff. To win the presidency, you have to win a majority of the Electoral College vote. In other words, unlike many other societies, we don't have proportional representation or even semi-proportional representation. And given how long the major parties have been operating, the two major parties today, the Democrats really since the era of Andrew Jackson in the 1830s, the Republicans since 1860, there were pretty entrenched loyalties. And it's very difficult for a third party to come out of nowhere and actually get pluralities to win legislative seats, or certainly to get a majority of the Electoral College. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992, and he didn't win a single electoral vote because he couldn't win any states. That's fundamental. Plus, it takes huge amounts of money to, challenge the major parties. One of the reasons Perot was successful, he was a billionaire, put a lot of money in for the time. Of course, Musk is a super billionaire, and maybe he will put a lot of money in. In addition, you got to get on the ballot, which takes a lot of time, energy, and money. You got to crack the media, which is always skeptical of any kind of third-party effort, given the secure positions of the major party. So it's not surprising that charismatic third-party candidates, you mentioned George Wallace in 1968, Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, Ross Perot in 1992, he's really the last one, by the way, have made a brief splash. But it's not surprising that no third party has endured as a major force in our two-party system.
So one final word, there's the opportunity and there's the threat. I'll start with the threat, which is that Elon Musk cannot run. He can't be on the ticket because he's born in South Africa, and that's one of the rules. If you have to run for president of the United States, you have to be born in the United States. So he's not born, so he'll have to find another candidate who he can back, like he backed Trump in 2024. The opportunity, though, is whoever that candidate is does not have to run against Trump because Trump can't run again. And I don't know. So enlighten our viewers. Who is the second most popular sort of face in the MAGA verse, in the MAGA universe, who may be considered, at least officially, the sort of successor to Trump? Is it Vance? Is it Rubio? Is there going to be, again, a Republican primary process to identify who's going to be the candidate in 2028?
Yeah. So far, Musk has indicated he wants to run a third-party campaign in a few selected Senate races and a few selected House races. Obviously, there's no presidential candidate in 2026. He hasn't signaled whether he's interested in running a presidential candidate in 2028. Can't run himself. That means he's going to have to find a candidate, and that's not an easy thing to do. And obviously, so far, it looks like the heir apparent to Donald Trump is Vice President J.D. Vance. There really isn't anyone else in the Republican Party at this point quite equal to the stature of Vance in the MAGA universe. But the election is over 3 years away. That is multiple lifetimes in politics.
Yeah, and if you want any more proof of that, look at the guy who's in the White House right now. I mean, no one gave him a chance, even when he was running in 2016. Including you. Including you. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Lichtman. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us with your thoughts and perspective.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
Absolutely, Akash. Continue to stay with us. Rather unfortunate as we are learning of this Jaguar fighter crash that has happened. This is in the Churu district of Rajasthan. We are awaiting more details, but worrying sort of first instances that are coming to light, as you can see in these visuals, where we see the wreckage that is spilled over in this patch of land. It has in fact scattered. Was it a mid-air crash? What resulted in the crash? All of those details are right now being ascertained. But let's take a look at this possible flight trajectory, where this Indian Air Force Jaguar jet really was going to. Did it in fact fly out of the Bikaner Air Base? For all those details, my colleague Toya Singh is joining us live from the CNN News 18 newsroom. Toya?
Hi, Griha. We want to draw our audience's attention right now to where this incident actually happened. So we're telling our audience it happened in Ratnagar, and we'll just zoom in a second. This is obviously a tehsil in the Churu district, and we'll bring you more context in a second. But first, as you can see, this is how far it is from Bikaner. We wanted to show you, just to zoom in a little bit to how close it was. But over here, this is the Ratnagar area, and this jet, as we're talking about, has clearly gone down somewhere in the field areas. So we'll show you more context as it comes in. But this is obviously taking place in the Ratnagar region. It's a tehsil, it's a district, as you can see, in Rajasthan, a little while away from Bikaner. So that's exactly where this crash has happened. Over to you.
Right, Toya, thank you so much for that. So Toya, through that satellite imagery, was fairly giving you a sense of how far this crash really took place from the township of Ratnagar. And the proximity really will be able to tell you the story of how ghastly this entire incident could have gone on to become. This crash eventually happened in this open field. We're constantly putting out these visuals, but there were villagers who came to this crash site. They in fact saw what happened, and they were very, very close to where the wreckage fell and did not fall on one particular spot. The plane disintegrated, we are told, the jet disintegrated, and these are parts, certain body parts also of possibly the pilot on board in that fighter jet also were found by many of these onlookers. To explain this better, we have our defense correspondent Akash, who has been tracking all the developments of this rather unfortunate piece of news that we're tracking out of Rajasthan. Akash, you were telling us earlier how this is the third Jaguar crash that has been reported in the country, but the very first one in Rajasthan. Rajasthan so far has seen MiG-29 and MiG-21 crashes, flying coffins, like our colleague Bhavani was also mentioning about them. But this one in particular, what might have caused this crash? What is the initial response of the Indian Air Force?
There can be some technical malfunctioning, Griha. There can be some other possible scenarios as well. And only court of inquiry will ascertain as to what went wrong. But this is for the benefit of our viewers as to what has happened. So we are learning about one plane crash, one There's a crash in Churu of Rajasthan where people have noticed wreckages and in fact some sort of air activity as well, where they were talking about a burning object, possibly the fighter plane, and where they are in fact talking about one dead body. So we are not drawing a conclusion, but a casualty is also expected in this particular case. However, we are learning that district administration has in fact reached on the particular site. Indian Air Force's team is very much going on to particular site. An official statement in fact is expected in some time from now, where we are learning that Indian Air Force will come out with an official statement. What was the platform? What was the nature of the crash? And also, as far as court of inquiry is concerned, so whether or not, it has been...
Namaste, Jai Hind and welcome to the Hard Facts. I'm Anand Narasimhan. The opposition has escalated its agitation over the Election Commission's exercise to revise the voter list ahead of the assembly elections in the state. Rahul Gandhi and Tejasvi Yadav led the Chakka Jam protest in Bihar, as well as a march to the office of the Chief Electoral Officer in Patna. Trains were disrupted at several locations across Bihar and roads were blocked, while incidents of violence were also reported from some parts in the state. Rahul Gandhi yet again stated that similar to Maharashtra elections, there was a clear plot to rig the Bihar elections, notwithstanding what the courts had opined on the Maharashtra polls. Now, ever since the SIR has been notified on the 24th of June and picked up speed 30th June onwards, the opposition has been calling the exercise a malignant move to disenfranchise millions of Bihar voters, especially the marginalized sections that may not be able to meet the entire criterion of verification. Listen in to this entire war of words.
मोदी जी अमित शाह